I lingered round them under the benign sky, watched the moths flutter among the hearth and harebells, listened to the soft winds breathing through the grass, and wondered how anyone could ever imagine unquiet slumbers for the sleepers in that quiet earth. Yeah, let's talk about this album. Wind and Wuthering by Genesis. So this is part of my going back and reviewing some of the albums that really made a difference in my own musical preference. This album was released in 1976, the same year as Trick of the Tail, and the same kind of year as like the big comeback for Genesis after Peter Gabriel had left. Many people wondered if the band could continue without the frontman, and both Trick of the Tail and Wind and Wuthering proved that indeed they could. Wind and Wuthering being the second album of this kind of 1-2 punch from the band. This was also the last album to feature Stephen Hackett on kind of lead guitar work. And you can kind of see that he's got one foot out of the door within this album. The only real song that he's got to contribute is Blood on the Rooftops. And although it's a great song, it is in some respects kind of the weaker of the album. There's a couple songs on this album that are the two low points, and I want to talk about those just to kind of get them out of the way. The first is Your Own Special Way, the big ballad of this album. Yeah, when I was first listening to this song as a teenager, I would usually skip it because I had it on CD, or if I was, listening to it on record, this would be the commercial break where I could get up and do whatever I needed to do. Your Own Special Way is fine. It's kind of over the top lovey-dovey, and as a teenager of that era, I was having none of it. I'm just like, this is... Nope! It also followed two really powerhouse songs of One for the Vine and What Gorilla. So being sandwiched between those two, it was kind of the low point. And unlike, say, Phil Collins' other ballads of this time, like More Fool Me, it didn't feel as genuine. It didn't feel as, like, oomph. It definitely felt more like a radio single than it did a heartfelt song. And Blood on the Rooftops is fine, but it is another somber track. It is less of a get up and go kind of a track. Like, there are a few moments within this song where it does perk up a little bit, especially the main chorus that keeps kind of rotating around it. But yeah, overall, I think it's one of the weaker songs that Steve had brought to the band. And you can tell that his heart wasn't really necessarily in it in the recording studio, because when he does it live nowadays, there's a lot more of a punch. There's a lot more of like an emphasis on certain aspects of the song. He gets really into those nitty-gritty parts and really brings to life what I feel like the studio recording should have done so. Let's talk a little bit about the personality of this. This one is a much more atmospheric album. It's much more of a somber and subdued album. There's many parts on this album that reflect directly to the novel of Wuthering Heights, which is really fun to kind of read and breathe to life these moments. And this album also has a lot of Tony Banks' personality. It's got much more of a finer touch on it. There's a lot more emphasis on like the mood and the emotion that's trying to come about. It's a lot less analytical. It's a lot less kind of storyteller with like a very precise narrative as, say, Trick of the Tail, or even the next album of And Then There Were Three. There's a lot more emphasis placed on that emotional aspect of the album, and I think that this is a very unique album within the Genesis repertoire because of this. This is also showcased within the three purely instrumental tracks, What Gorilla, Quiet Slumbers for the Sleepers, and In That Quiet Earth. These three songs showcase a different facet of the band up at this point, where What Gorilla is much more in your face, it's much more bombastic, it does ebb and flow a lot more, and The Quiet Slumbers is just kind of a prelude, being only at about 2.5 minutes, and In That Quiet Earth has those really long stretches of that journey of where are we going, which section are we going into next, and I love that little bit of a build up into that dun 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 dun. Like, that is just, I can't help but just like wait and like headbang along to it because it's so grooving. And we also have like a really interesting journey within the song of One for the Vine. This is probably my favorite song off of the entire album. I love when they do this live, and I really like the rendition that they put out with the 3 Sides Live Deluxe package where it's on there. Just the drumming styles within that mid section, I feel like they kind of go off the map a little bit, but in the best possible way. I love the story of like this recurring character that keeps fumbling away from the main group to find another group, and essentially he becomes the next mouthpiece, and then he sees somebody fumbling away from that group. And I also like the play on words a little bit. This is something that a lot of people had done, but One for the Vine being one for divine, where he's having this conversation with this godlike figure. Really interesting and really fun to play that out. And just the music that's found within this as well. As I said, when they go off the map and they're using all these different sounds to really permeate, really fun, especially within that rhythm section. And I'm surprised I haven't even talked about the first song of 11th Earl of Mar, just how this song opens up. It kind of sets the stage for what we're expecting within this. It starts off on a very somber, very slow movement with just the synthesizers painting the way, and then we get into that blast of sound. And like I said, it kind of lays the foundation for what we're going to expect within the album overall, and I think it's a great way to open up the album and just kind of introduce us to what we're expecting. So what song haven't I talked about yet? I think I've covered pretty much everything on this album, except the closing track. I almost forgot about Afterglow, the big track off of this album. This is the only track that's found on Seconds Out, and it is a staple of live performances. Just where it goes, like how it bleeds from In That Quiet Earth all the way to Afterglow. And even though Afterglow is that stereotypical lovey-dovey fun track, I still love it. Like, this is what those kind of ballads need to be. It's this grandiose, over-the-top, big shouting out into the void of just this gushing of music. And I love how they rendition and overlay the vocals within Colin's vocal work, and when they play it live, it's all the synthesizers, and I love that little bit of a spice to it. And I love just how powerful this song is. Even though it's very slow and very somber, it's still very, very powerful and in your face, and I love that over-the-top aspect of this track. And that's pretty much the album. I really, really love Wind and Wuthering, and I feel it kind of gets overshadowed by all the predecessing albums. But I still love it, and there's some really, really great moments on this. Even though it is a much more atmospheric, it's much more of an emotive album than anything that Genesis had done up until that point. And I can understand why people don't connect with this album as much as the past works. Steve Hackett really isn't found on this album, even though he's on it. It's not quite as tangible, I guess, as the other albums. There's not quite as many radio singles. There's not quite as many moments of get up and go as the past albums were. But I love the fact that they tried something a little bit different and showcased a different side of them. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. Overall, I love this album, and I love it with my whole heart. It's one that I come back to so often because of how powerful it really is. It might be one of the most powerful Genesis albums in terms of an emotional outpour. And yeah, that's about it about Wind and Wuthering from Genesis. What did you guys think about this album? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Let me know of your own experiences with this album by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.